Thank you. Welcome to the Establishing Internal Controls, Creating Tools for Compliance live session. We're excited that there's so many attendees with us this afternoon, and I guess it's morning for some of you still, but we'll get through the morning and afternoon together. The purpose of this session is to review internal controls in managing costs and revenues and to discuss the key elements of effective internal controls. As a reminder, there are relevant e-courses available that are relevant to this session, and those are the key elements of grants compliance, the match requirements and documentation course, the member activity reporting, and the staff activity reporting e-courses will be helpful when you're looking at your internal controls as an organization. It's also something to think about as budgets have become increasingly tightened. The need to optimize controls over assets and cost management has increased. The need for enhanced internal controls is a natural part of managing costs and revenues. The chief aim within an organization is to provide measurable assurances for an effective and efficient operation. Internal controls over cash and other crucial operating assets ultimately promote efficiency. In addition, internal controls seek to minimize the risks of unauthorized acquisition, use, or disposition of assets. In other words, internal controls also seek to prevent fraud or, at the very least, identify and detect fraud in a timely manner. As you know, the Office of Inspector General mentioned in their session yesterday the need for internal controls as being crucial. And this is one of the reasons why CNCS continually places emphasis on the need for internal controls. The objectives of this session are to define internal controls and explain the importance of written policies and procedures. We really want to focus on that importance of having those written policies and procedures within your organization. It's also to explain the key components of internal controls, selected policies and procedures, and need for compliance. Explain the relationship between both program and fiscal matters, and provide common compliance findings due to the lack of adequate controls. A little housekeeping. We'll just note that there's a couple of live session features, the first being the polling feature. There will be 2 polling questions in this session. The questions ask for your input and experiences in internal controls. And to conduct the polling, we will indicate when a poll is open, and you can respond to the question individually. We'll let you know when the polling is closed, and then the results will auto-generate and display your responses in real time. The second feature, although on the PowerPoint here that you're viewing says it's a chat feature, it's actually the Q&A feature. And we encourage you to use the Q&A feature for your questions as they might arise throughout the session. We do have an internal moderator who's organizing and prioritizing these questions according to the topics presented as part of this session, and as well as the frequency that question is raised. We'll try to respond to as many questions as possible. However, it is likely that not all the questions will be answered during the webinar, and therefore questions that aren't addressed during the session, as mentioned earlier, will be posted to the Financial Management Message Board in the FFMC exhibit booth. So a quick review of the agenda. To begin, we'll spend a few minutes reviewing the definition of internal controls and their basis in both federal and CNCS regulations. We'll review the purpose of the controls as well as the key elements of effective internal controls, and we'll explore written policies and procedures. We'll spend some time looking at what happens when internal controls are insufficient. And at the end of the session, as we mentioned, there'll be time reserved to ask questions and share experiences. Some sources that this session draws information from include CNCS and federal laws, rules and regulations, CNCS grants terms and conditions, excuse me, as well as generally accepted accounting and financial principles and practices. Excuse me. Some documents to help ensure internal controls help to ensure compliance with include the National and Community Service Act of 1990, the Code of Federal Regulations, the OMB circulars specific to your type of organization, state and local regulations, the notice of funding opportunity for your particular grant, your notice of grant award, the special terms and conditions, and certifications and assurances. These all drive the compliance requirements. What are internal controls? They're organizational policies, procedures, and processes and systems. For example, we know that co-signatures are required if a request is over a certain amount for many organizations. We also, another example might be a written policy is required if you have cell phone use through your budget in your grant. We'll also, another internal control is clear identification and appropriate separation of authorities, responsibilities, and duties. And also, they are to help ensure financial integrity of an organization. And the reason being is they improve effectiveness and efficiency of operations, as well as help provide reliable financial reporting and help ensure compliance. So we ask, why internal controls? First, they provide a system of checks and balances. They protect your organization from financial abuse. And something to note, they are not an organizational burden. They ensure that you're able to optimize how you spend your money. So just thinking this through, the leadership of your organization plays a significant role in the effectiveness of the internal control structure.
The primary objective of internal controls is to provide reasonable assurance regarding the achievement of objectives. Effective internal control helps an organization achieve its operations, financial reporting, and compliance objectives. Effective internal control is built in as part of the management process. Internal control keeps an organization on course towards its objectives and the achievement of its mission, and minimizes surprises along the way. Internal control promotes effectiveness and efficiency of operations, reduces the risk of asset loss, and helps to ensure compliance with laws and regulations. Internal control should also ensure the reliability of reporting, such as ensuring that all transactions have a clear audit trail and that all transactions are recorded on a timely basis and receive proper approval. Supervisor approval implies that he or she has verified and validated that the activity or transactions conform to established policies and procedures. Internal control can provide only reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance, regarding the achievement of your organization's objectives. Effective internal control helps an organization achieve its objectives. It does not ensure success. There are several reasons why internal controls cannot provide absolute assurance that objectives will be achieved, such as collusion among employees and cost-benefit realities. For example, segregation of duties is critical to the effective internal control. It reduces the risk of both erroneous and inappropriate actions in general. The approval function, the accounting and reconciliation function, and the asset custody function should be separated among employees. Essentially, you want two sets of eyes. When these functions cannot be separated due to small organization size, A detailed supervisory review of related activities required as a compensating control. This provides a listing of elements of a good internal control system. Written policies and procedures are important because they establish protocols that staff must follow. These established protocols help bring order and cohesiveness to your organization, as everyone knows what's expected as outlined in the procedures. They help in maintaining information that is crucial to operations that would otherwise remain in an employee's head. They help in orienting new employees and support staff if the appropriate personnel are absent. Written policies and procedures should be established, followed, and updated as needed. As times change, so does the need for policies. Policies set expectations and, quote, represent what is to be done. Procedures describe how it is to be done. Effective policies explain the rationale and include examples of principal transactions and completed forms. So, for example, if you have a travel requisition policy or employee travel policy, you should have a sample of the form and the proper completion of that form, along with the associated procedures for obtaining the proper procedures and the rate of reimbursement, etc. Good internal controls also provide an adequate review process for financial transactions, financial reports, and budgets. They answer how information is shared between fiscal and program staff. There should be a system to track volunteer and employee activities. Reviewing reports, statements, reconciliations, and other information by management is an important control activity. Management should review actual expenditures against budgets to determine the extent to which goals and objectives are being achieved, and to identify unexpected results which require follow-up. This represents a listing of key policies and procedures. I will not touch each and every one of them. However, a listing of these sample of the policies and procedures will be available as handouts in the library for access after the session is completed. One of the key things that these represent critical things that would result in a non-compliance if we were on site and you didn't have written policies or procedures associated with these. So if you realize that any one of these are not yet part of your policies and procedures, you may want to take steps to implement a policy related to any of these policies right now. In addition to the policies that we just looked over, these represent 3 additional policies that govern federal funds. FFR completion, which represents, or the acronym means the Federal Financial Report. It reports how you have expended your grant funds, and it is a required internal control reporting, not only in e-grants, it's a requirement at the payment management system. And you should also have established a written payment management system drawdown policy of federal funds, which would encompass how much money you drew down, the expenditures associated, a detailed listing of the expenditures that encompass that drawdown amount, along with written policies and procedures that your staff members can follow. Should there be a change in staffing, someone new could come in and pick up the policy and hit the ground running. A system should also be established to achieve the non-federal match requirement. Now we're approaching the portion of the presentation or the session that you have the opportunity to submit some questions, if you like, through the Q&A session or feature that we mentioned, that Katie mentioned earlier.
Deborah, there was one question that was related to your last slide that might be helpful.
Okay, let me go back to it.
She asked, what is meant by drawdown?
Okay, thank you for sharing that with me, Katie, because I did not see that. I'm not quite sure why I didn't see that. Just one moment. Drawdown is if you're on a reimbursement basis, or if you're the person at your organization that's designated to perform the payment management system drawdowns, you would go to the payment management system using your specifically identified user ID and password. You would log on to the payment management system and draw down. If you're drawing down for salaries and volunteer expenses, you would draw down maybe $15,000 for whatever has been approved for that particular time frame related to expenditures or expenses that you have incurred for that designated period, whether it be representative of your payroll cycle. It would represent your drawdown. You can draw down funds based on your immediate needs, or you can reimburse your agency based on the expenditures, allowable expenditures that you have incurred. I see another question. I am a new director. Should these policies be kept at the program level only, or should it be agency kept policies? It should be an agent or program specific policies and procedures. Some policies, for example, if you're a senior court grantee, you should have policies and procedures related to that program, as well as organization-specific accounting and policies and procedures. Many of the policies that were on that list are organization-specific, but they can impact the program as well. The PowerPoint, one of the other questions is, will the PowerPoint be available to print later at a later time? Yes. The materials from this session will be available, I believe, until September 4th.
Deborah, this is Mary. There's another question online, and the question is this: if your organization has policies and personnel handbook, is it necessary to have an additional handbook with the same information?
No, it is not.
Okay, thank you. Another question that came in is, when speaking about these items, is this something that the program director is to do or the sponsoring agency?
Well, it should be your sponsoring agency. However, the program director should be involved in preparing the policies and procedures or the policy handbook for the program itself. Because normally you have to have policies and procedures for your volunteers. So that would be something that it would be critical that the project director be involved in.
Wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome. I see another question out here. If an employer provides 1% of supervision over the FGP grant and the salary is under the excess column in the budget, that question just moved away from me for some reason. Give me 1 second.
I'll chime in there. If an employee provides 1% of supervision over the FGP grant and the salary is under excess column in the budget, does he or she have to complete a timesheet for FGP, and does he or she have to do a self-certification for the background check?
I'm not sure about the background check. Katie, can you speak to the background portion of that? But with respect to if the employee has 1% of his or her time allocated to the excess column, that is implying that a portion of their time is being spent on other possibly fundraising or other non-CNCS activities. So that activity must be allocated on the timesheet under a different funding source. It cannot be charged to the federal or non-federal share of the grant.
And in regard to the background check, we'll reference that back to the FFMC exhibit booth, and also just a reminder that the criminal background check session yesterday will be available as well. And so I think we'll keep moving since there's a lot of questions, and we'll keep moving on the PowerPoint at this point so we can get through it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. There are a few critical elements related to staff time and activity reports. Time and activity reports must include they must reflect after the fact time determinations of actual activity. They must be signed and dated by an employee and a supervisor with firsthand knowledge of the activity. They must be prepared at least monthly and coincide with one or more pay periods. And they must account for the total activity for which employees are compensated and which is required as fulfillment of their obligations to the organization. So essentially what that is saying is if your time is allocated to various funding sources and you're not 100% on the grant, your timesheet must be reflective of that. The timesheets time and activity must provide support for charges to salaries and wages that are supported by records indicating the total number of hours worked each day.
So taking a look at the tracking of in-kind contributions, although it's been addressed in other sessions, I would like to take a moment to discuss the key elements since it's important in the context of internal controls. So in order to adequately track in-kind contributions, the following is required. The documentation of the basis for determining the value of personal services, materials, equipment, building, and land. And in the documentation, written acknowledgement from the donor should include the name and the signature of the donor, the date and location of the donation, the detailed description of the item or service, an estimated value of that contribution, how the value was determined, and who made that determination. And finally, whether the contribution was obtained with federal funds. It's important to note that some common compliance findings found within kind contributions includes one is complete lack of documentation of those contributions, and the others is another one is if the contribution was obtained from federal funds, whether it's allowable to use those federal funds or not. So be certain to have controls for both the documentation and ensuring that each piece of the documentation is included. Taking a look at the job description and its importance to internal controls. The job description ensures that the functions and activities of the particular position are appropriate and coincide with your approved budget. So the key elements of a job title, who the individual reports to, if any people they supervise, the list of those, their basic functions, their duties and responsibilities, their qualifications, and classification within your organization.
An accounting system must include the following elements. It must have the ability to distinguish funds by funding source. It must have the ability to identify costs by program year and by budget category. It should also be able to differentiate between direct and indirect costs. It must also be able to maintain federal and non-federal funds separately and record in-kind contributions as both revenue and expenses. A chart of accounts is essentially or literally a list of ledger accounts that are to be maintained in an organization's accounting system. There are usually common elements of usually include common elements associated with a chart of accounts, which includes the asset, liability, income, and expense accounts. And they typically include special accounts are created to track expenditures, such as an account to track unallowable costs. Internal controls should be in place to monitor actual versus budget monitor actual expenditures or outlays against budgets. Management should require explanations for any budget variations that are unexpected or unusual in nature and determine any necessary corrective actions. Internal controls generally ensure compliance with laws, regulations, and CNCS terms and conditions, particularly achieving the match requirements. They should also ensure that a system is in place to obtain prior approval from CNCS for budget changes, such as changes in key persons specified in the approved budget or changes in time devoted to the project.
So moving to budget development execution. Again, this was part of some of yesterday's sessions, but it's important in the context of developing internal controls. And it's important as we look at internal controls, how program and fiscal staff can work together with the budget. The key elements of a budget would include developing the program budget by line item, developing a system to track the budgeted versus actual expenses, reviewing these expenses on a quarterly basis at a minimum, but more frequently could be more effective. Determining what line item funds can be reallocated based on periodic reviews, and know when CNCS approval is needed for the budget changes. Some important things to note is when you're looking at the budget, developing systems, for example, of how you will ensure that your match is being met. So while there are match requirements, it's important to have internal controls looking at how you will ensure that you're meeting the match that you propose. So this slide is related to organizational documentation procedures. These procedures outline the documents necessary to implement its internal controls and to delegate responsibility for tasks. Documentation maintains the segregation of duties by outlining job descriptions and clearly detailing the tasks and responsibilities of each position in the budget. The documentation of policies and procedures also provides a clear chain of command in decision-making and provides the basis for making decisions. So documentation should ensure that costs conform to the grant contract limitations, that they're allowable under the budget and cost principles, costs are treated consistently, and in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. All documentation should support what services or goods were obtained, the justification for why the transaction is allowable for the grant purposes, and value of the in-kind contributions. The key elements of selected policies and procedures handout is located in the library tab and provides a summary of the internal controls for policies discussed in the webinar. So, moving to our polling question.
Okay, we'll give you about 15 seconds to complete the polling question. We'll give you about 15 seconds to complete the polling question. Once you select the answer, just hit the submit button. It appears that the majority, 92% of our participants have indicated that all areas should be captured, which is correct. And effective, now we're moving on to what represents an ideal internal control environment. An effective internal control environment is an environment where competent people understand their responsibilities, the limits to their authority, and are knowledgeable, mindful, and committed to doing what is right and doing it the right way. They are committed to following an organization's policies and procedures and its ethical and behavioral standards. The control environment encompasses technical expertise. An environment that is supportive of internal controls has the following characteristics. It's a positive atmosphere in which to work. The organization has a documented code of conduct. There are timely and appropriate communications with the board of directors, including providing the detailed financial reports. The environment has documented policies and procedures such as job descriptions and policies to hire, train, promote, and compensate employees. It is an environment that also has safeguards for employees related to whistleblowing. And they have clearly written delegations of authority and responsibility and a clear chain of command. All levels within an organization are responsible for internal controls. Now I'll review each role's responsibility, each individual's role regarding internal controls. The board of directors provide oversight for internal controls. The executives of your organization establish the presence of integrity, ethics, competence, and a positive control environment. The directors and department heads have oversight responsibility for internal controls within their specific units. The line managers and supervisors are responsible for executing controls and policies at the unit level within their specific units. Individuals within a department must be cognizant of the proper internal control procedures associated with their specific job responsibilities. Program staff, I'm moving into the area where we encourage the program and physical staff to collaborate with one another. For example, program staff are responsible for tracking the fiscal activities of the program, whereas the fiscal staff is charged with responsibility of ensuring that all the costs and expenditures are accurately applied and recorded in the general ledger in accordance to generally accepted accounting principles, and that any specific grant requirements are adhered to. Now we're moving on to another polling question. We'll give you approximately 15 seconds to answer this one. This polling question is to determine how often staff in your organization meet. And we want to remind you that internal control, to some degree, is everyone's responsibility. Implementation is based on everyone's actions. Managers are primarily responsible for identifying the controls for the organization. but however, the responsibility for monitoring their internal control system. And frequent monitoring of internal controls will improve the quality of any system that's in place. It appears that 59% of you meet approximately once a month, and 21% meet weekly. The fact that you are meeting is definitely a plus, because there should be an ongoing dialogue between program and fiscal staff to make sure there's a cohesiveness between the two departments and ensure compliance with the terms and conditions of the award. The following reasons why you should collaborate. The program and fiscal staff provide a different perspective on issues and matters related to compliance with the program regulations or OMB circulars or fiscal requirements of the grant. Together, each can use their talent and experience to contribute to the overall success of the program. And the old adage goes, 2 minds are better than one. Now we're going to open up the session for questions. And as Katie mentioned earlier at the start of the session, we recommend that you use the Q&A session to chat in your questions or submit your questions.
And while those questions are continuing to come in, I will move through and complete the slides. So as we've discussed, the benefits of high-quality internal controls include increased organizational efficiency and effectiveness. However, insufficient internal controls can have a negative impact on an organization, and some examples of potential impacts of insufficient internal controls can result in question cost, material weaknesses, and non-compliance with requirements. Federal funds may be managed inappropriately. Funding sources could be jeopardized. Inconsistencies in practices, processes, reviews, approvals, and documentation. Inefficient use of time and resources, repayment of disallowed or unallowable costs could occur. So it's quite clear how important it is to ensure that each of these internal controls are set for your organization. So as I'm looking at the time, I see that it's 2:40 and Eastern time, or Central time, 3:40 Eastern, and so we're going to wrap up. We can, if you choose, you can continue to stay, and we will wrap up the session. And if you want to log out, you're more than welcome to. And if you'd like to stay, we welcome that as well. So moving to the next slide. I just wanted to show some examples of audit findings, and there's 2 types of audit findings, a question cost and a material weakness. A question cost is believed to be a violation of a provision of law, regulation, contract, grant, cooperative agreement, or another agreement or document governing the expenditures of your federal funds. For example, a member's time and activity is not documented, but the member is paid for those hours. This could result in a question cost. A material weakness is a reportable condition, and this is a bit of legalese, the definition, but I'll try to get through it with y'all. When one or more of an organization's internal controls is put in place to prevent significant financial statement irregularities, that is considered to be ineffective. So if there's a deficiency in an internal control is thought to be a material weakness, this means that it could lead to a material misstatement in the organization's financial statements. For example, the inability to prepare a general ledger in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles indicates that there is a material weakness. This can create great financial risk to an organization if they can't justify their financial reporting, which generally a general ledger is used to do so. There should be adequate controls in place to report properly. And then here you see a list of general examples of noncompliance due to inadequate controls. And those include late submission of financial reports, missing or questionable source documents, time and activity reports missing or not signed or dated, financial reports that can't be reconciled to the general ledger. Some member eligibility examples include lack of documents or inaccurate documents, records, or files, unacceptable justification for changes made to time and activity reports. These are all common findings discovered during audits, which can be attributed to the lack of internal controls. And I just wanted to point out the required written policies and procedures is in the library tab, and it outlines these required policies and procedures for organizations receiving federal grant funds. So now we're back to the general Q&A. Mary, are there any questions?
Yes, Katie, there are a number of questions. One question is from a new director, and they asked, should the policies be kept at the program level only, or should it be agency-kept policies?
I believe that was one of the questions I did answer verbally.
Okay, wonderful. And the next question is, are there form examples available online to compile a policies and procedures book?
There are sample listing of the policies that are listed. I don't think there are any sample policies per se, like a procurement policy. It's not a sample policy out there. However, you can refer to the regulation under the Uniform Administrative Cost Principles that identify many of the standards for financial management for many of those policies, and you can customize it based on your organization's needs.
Wonderful. Do we have time for a third question?
Yes.
Okay. Third question. Why would a special policy be needed governing matching funds when the required amounts are clear, as are the federal rules governing their expenditure in various places? What elements should such a policy include?
What was implied with that is not necessarily a separate matching requirement policy, but the fact that you should have some kind of system in place to ensure that your agency will achieve the stated match requirements at the end of each budget period.
Great. Thanks, Deborah. I think given that we're very short of time, and as we expected, many of our questions will have to be answered through the FFMC exhibit booth, and we will be sure to post those later.
Thank you, everyone, for attending.
So to close out, just a reminder, the internal controls handouts from this session will be at the library tab in the virtual conference technology platform, and they're as listed there. And I just wanted to close out by saying a few thoughts. Internal controls do affect every level in our organizations, regardless of your size. Creation and monitoring of internal controls is a continual process that allow an organization to achieve its goals effectively and efficiently, and to be sure they are sufficient. In sum, we recommend that you familiarize yourself with the documents composing the basis for internal controls and compliance documents. And this is, of course, if you haven't already done so. And that you should review current internal controls and policies and procedures for your organization. And if necessary, implement policies featuring the key elements of internal controls if they're not already in place. And we thank you for your time, and we're sorry that it went a little over today.